All right, we're going to get started here in a minute, everybody. All right, thank you for being here this morning. We're going to go ahead and get started with class. I got to hurry every time I think about it here. This phone was left in here. If anybody knows, if anybody's missing a phone, you can have it for $50. No, it looks like it might be Josie's, but I'm not sure. But it's somebody's phone, so if you hear somebody, I'll just put it right here. All right, we're going through evidence class here on Christian evidences, and we're talking about dinosaurs, and so I'm not going to go through all that I did last week, but we want to look at there's so much. I could probably do a quarter on dinosaurs, but it's going to have to be about 3 weeks or so. How do dinosaurs fit in the Bible? We want to try to answer these questions. What about dinosaurs? Where'd they come from? Are dinosaurs in the Bible? Were there dinosaurs on the ark? What happened to the dinosaurs? Those are the questions that most people have. And so there are lots of dinosaurs in the Bible. We talked about how big some of the largest dinosaurs are. We talked about the fact that Brontosaurus, for nearly 100 years, everybody believed there was such a thing as a Brontosaurus, and it never really existed. It was made up from a couple other guys by that liar right there. And so there's a bunch of stuff that we covered. Why is it important? What? Oh. No, not you. This guy. Dinosaurs came into the world after sin. And so we talked about a bunch of different things. We agree that dinosaurs lived. We just don't agree about when. Are dinosaurs in the Bible? Well, what would you expect dinosaurs to be if they're in the Bible? And so the first chapter of Genesis clearly indicates that land animals and man were created on the sixth day. Either you believe that or you don't. Either you believe that God created dinosaurs on the sixth day or you don't. Which means either you believe the Bible or you don't. And those are literal days. I won't get into theistic evolution, but those are literal days. We talked again a little bit just to remind people about how carbon dating works and doesn't work. The word dinosaur is not going to be found in the Bible. It really came about in the 1800s, and so you're not going to find the word dinosaur in the Bible. But the experts don't even know for sure. They can't even say for sure whether dinosaurs were warm-blooded or cold-blooded animals. So we talked a little bit about that. And then we came to Job chapter 40, where God is beginning to respond to Job, and he begins talking about the behemoth. The behemoth is a word that means giant, kingly, beast. And so we said several things about that. They didn't translate the word behemoth because there wasn't an animal when they translated. There wasn't an animal that they could compare it to, so they just transliterated the word, if you know what transliterate means, and we went through some of that. And so we talked about how big it is, how big this animal, this behemoth is. And I think it was clearly a dinosaur. We talked about how the word, how the strength is in its loins, in its waist, in its legs, and those kinds of things. And the tail of this behemoth is like a cedar tree. And people say, well, it was an elephant or a hippopotamus. I don't think so. They don't have a tree, a tail the size of a cedar tree. But large sauropods, dinosaurs, do have that. And so besides that, there's a different word in Hebrew for tail and trunk and all those things. So it's a huge animal. We mentioned about maybe what they think is the biggest now, and something about the bones of these animals. And so that's kind of a quick reminder of what we did. So remember, Job is struggling. He's in this extreme physical and emotional pain. He's asking God why. And God's reminding Job, look at what I made. Remember who I am. I made this behemoth. I made this magnificent animal here. And so if the behemoth isn't a dinosaur, then I don't know what it is. It's certainly not a hippopotamus or an elephant. Now, verse 19 of chapter 40. God speaking says, he is the chief or the first of the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. The behemoth is the chief of all of God's creatures, the largest of all the animals. The word chief is translated from a Hebrew word which means noble, chief ruler, select beast of distinction and eminence, an animal that, quote, resides over all others. Is the captain. So it's in other words, it's the biggest, it's the commander, it's the hugest, it's the chief of all the animals. Now the second part of that verse there, let his maker bring near his sword. What God is saying, nobody can capture behemoth. Nobody can capture or kill this animal. This is a humongous animal, Job. You know that. But God, who created dinosaurs, can also defeat behemoth and the rest. And so God is saying, Job, look what I can do. I created this thing and I can tame him if I want to. But Job, this animal is unapproachable by man. No man can bring this thing in. These sauropods, dinosaurs, we talked about the tail like a cedar tree. One guy said that probably when they would turn around, their kill zone may have been as much as a couple hundred feet. These are humongous animals. Okay, verse 20 through 22, God says, surely the mountains bring him food, and all the beasts of the field play there. Under the lotus plants he lies down in the covert of the reeds and the marsh. There's a big animal lying down. The lotus plants cover him with shade. The willows of the brook surround him. And so he spends most of his time in the water, the marsh or the swamp, depending on what translation you have. He gets his food from the mountains where other animals play. That's not typical of a hippopotamus or an elephant. Verse 23, if a river rages, he's not alarmed. He's confident, though the Jordan rushes to his mouth. And so what God is saying, whatever this animal is, he's big enough and strong enough to stand firm and still in a river, even when the river is flooding. Other animals run for the hills, but behemoth stands there in the rushing waters of a river. And it almost says it's as if he could almost drink the river by himself. This is a humongous animal. You know how strong rushing water is. And God is saying, behemoth just stands there. Well, that doesn't apply to a hippopotamus or an elephant either, because rushing waters can sweep them away. And so it's a massive animal. And so it can't be any other animal, in my view. It can't be any other animal than one of these huge dinosaurs. Now, verse 24, this is very interesting. He says, he asks Job, can anyone capture him when he's on watch? With barbs and snares, can anyone pierce his nose? And it's a rhetorical question. Job, you know nobody can capture this animal. There are all kinds of snares and traps we use for animals. And, of course, they don't use traps much for a horse. But, if you get 2 or 3 or maybe 4 lassos around a horse, you can even bring a horse down, a wild horse down, and tame it. God says nobody can capture this thing. You know that, Job. Nobody can do that. You try to throw a rope around Behemoth, and he's going to give you a ride you won't forget, because this is a massive animal. God says none of these things, none of these traps, none of these things are going to work with Behemoth. Now, the fact that God mentions his eyes, he is, when he's on watch, God mentions his eyes and his nose. I don't know, but I think I believe that's important. I think that's also a little bit of a hint. The Brachiosaurus and other sauropods are land animals, of course, but they could submerge themselves in water, and when they did, they could actually hide themselves like a crocodile or something. And so there is a picture of a crocodile with his eyes and his nose above the water. And that seems to me, that verse 24 seems to me to be a reference to this. You can't, Job, nobody can capture him when he's on his watch, like that crocodile in the water. And with barbs and snares, can anyone pierce his nose? And so I almost imagine that in very, very deep water that these things may have been like that they would stand below the surface of the water and stick their heads up like a crocodile does. We don't know that for sure, but that's my opinion. Now, somebody says, oh, well, maybe Job was speaking figuratively, or he was sick and didn't know what he was seeing. The one problem with that is Job's not the one talking here. God's the one talking about this animal. And God knew what animal he was talking about. So somebody says, well, maybe Behemoth is just symbolic. That's convenient. It wasn't symbolic when you thought it was an elephant or a hippopotamus, but then they fall back on, oh, well, it's just a symbolic animal. And so that doesn't make sense either. Now, all through God's talk with Job, God refers to all kinds of animals. He refers to ostriches, goats, hawks, horses, peacocks. He mentions lions, ravens, deer, donkeys, locusts, ox, and other animals. What is the point of that? God is mentioning all of these different animals, and in the middle of, well, really mostly toward the end of it, he mentions Behemoth and Leviathan. And he's mentioning all these animals to describe his power as the creator and the sustainer. They were all animals with which Job was familiar. If not, if Job wasn't familiar with all these animals that God is pointing him to and referring to, then God's point would be wasted. I mean, if he's talking about Behemoth and Leviathan, which we're going to talk about in a minute, Job would be saying, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking. What is this Behemoth you're talking about? I've never seen that. And so it's obvious that God was showing an animal, God was showing Job an animal that Job was already familiar with. Now, what does that say? Obviously, that says, if we believe that Behemoth and Leviathan, but we're going to get to that. If we believe that Behemoth is a dinosaur, and God is saying, look at Behemoth, Job, that means dinosaurs were on the earth when man was on the earth. And evolutionists and atheists can think whatever they want to think, and they can write whatever garbage they want in the supposed science books. But I'm going to take the Bible as my guide for those kinds of things. And so God tells Job, look at this humongous animal I made. Job, this thing is huge. Don't worry. I know you're hurting, Job, but remember who I am. Remember what I've done and what I can do. Remember that. And so I think this one verse proves that dinosaurs lived with man. So Behemoth was either an unknown animal when the Bible was translated or one that had gone extinct. And my premise is that it was by the time it was translated into English, that it was an unknown animal. But Behemoth did not live millions of years ago, because Job saw one of these things with his own eyes. And God wasn't showing Job some kind of a vision or something. Remember, Job lost everything. He's in unimaginable pain. I cannot imagine what Job was going through. And he keeps asking God why. And we come down towards the end of the book, around chapter 38, and we are ready for God to tell him what's happening. And I think that what what Job says towards the end there in chapter 42, he begins to give God the glory for his creation. Remember, Job says, oh man, I've been talking about stuff, I don't know what I'm talking about. I repent in ashes. I'm sorry, God. And so he's giving God the glory for the creation. But we come down to chapter 38, and we kind of want God to give Job the answer. Job's been saying, why? And we kind of want him to give Job the answer. And he doesn't. He goes 4 chapters and never says a single thing about Job's suffering. Not a single thing. And he says all these things about his creation. And maybe the human part of us, we're a little bit let down by that. But as I said last week, I think in part God could have said to Job, Job, if I explained it to you, you wouldn't understand it. It's not that I can't explain it to you, Job. I can explain it to you. But you wouldn't understand it even if I explained it to you. And he's saying, Job, do you trust me? I got your back. It's okay. I'm in control. I did all these things in the creation. I know what you're going through, and I understand. You need to trust me, Job. So that's Behemoth, and I'm going to keep moving because I want to get to Leviathan. The very next chapter, chapter 41, he talks about Leviathan. It's 34 verses, but I think it's at least instructive for us to go ahead and read through them. God asks, can you pull in the Leviathan with a fish hook or tie down his tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he keep begging you for mercy? Will he speak? These are obvious rhetorical questions. The answer is no, Job, you can't do this. Will he keep you begging you? Will he keep begging you for mercy? Will he speak to you with gentle words? Will he make an agreement with you for you to take him as your slave for life? Can you make a pet of him like a bird or put him on a leash for your girls? Will traders barter for him? Will they divide him up among merchants? Can you fill his hide with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? If you lay a hand on him, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing him is false. The mere sight of him is overpowering. No one is fierce enough to rouse him. Who then is able to take a stand against me? This is God speaking to Job, remember. Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. I will not fail to speak of his limbs, his strength, his graceful form. Who can strip off his outer coat? Who would approach him with a bridle? Who dares open the doors of his mouth, ringed about with his fearsome teeth? His back has rows of shields tightly sealed together, each so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined first to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. His snorting throws out flashes of light. His eyes are like the rays of dawn. Firebrands stream from his mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. His breath sets coals ablaze and flames dart from his mouth. Strength resides in his neck. Dismay goes before him. The folds of his flesh are tightly joined. They are firm and immovable. His chest is as hard as a rock, hard as a lower millstone. When he rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before his thrashing. The sword that reaches him has no effect, nor does the spear or the dart or the javelin. Iron he treats like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. Arrows do not make him flee. Sling stones are like chaff to him. A club seems to him but a piece of straw. He laughs at the rattling of the lance. His undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. He makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron and stirs up the tree like a pot of ointment. Behind him he leaves a glistening wake. One would think the deep had white hair. Nothing on earth is his equal, a creature without fear. He looks down on all that are haughty. He is king over all that are proud. Now, what animal is that? What animal is God talking about here? Well, whatever it is, Job, again, must have been familiar with it. Albert Barnes, a respected commentator, in his commentary suggests 7 possibilities, more or less, 7 possibilities, and he more or less concludes that it must have been a crocodile. In fact, some Bibles, your Bible you have, I don't know, may footnote it that way. I don't know. Some Bibles actually footnote it crocodile. But it's not a crocodile. A lot of people through the years have said that it's a crocodile. It's not a crocodile. And so let's go back and get into this a little bit. By the way, that was somebody's drawing of it. There's been a number of different drawings of it. but someone drew that of it. So let's go back. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? You can do that with a crocodile. You can do it with a crocodile. The crocodile hunter showed us that. The crocodile hunter did all kinds of things with those alligators and crocodiles. You can do it with a crocodile. God says you can't do it with this animal, not with Leviathan. You just can't do that. A man, I'm not. I'll tell you what. I'm in a hurry, so I'm not going to take time to read all this. But this guy Herodias described in pretty good detail how this was done with a crocodile. Verse 3, will he make many supplications for you? Will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? In other words, will he submit to you? Is Leviathan going to submit to you, Job? And the obvious answer is no, he's not going to submit. An animal like Leviathan is not going to submit. Now, we know that the crocodiles will submit. We've seen that all the time. They blindfold them and they jump on them, and the crocodiles just lay there. They just sit there. But that's not true with Leviathan. So this is not a crocodile. Let's keep going. Will you play with him like a bird? Will you bind him for your maidens? Will the traders bargain over him? Will they divide him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him, remember the battle, and you'll not do it again. And so God says here that you're not going to capture and then buy and sell and trade Leviathan. But people do that with crocodiles. They do it with crocodiles. The Egyptians considered the crocodile really sacred. They treated it with a lot of respect. It was fed, it was babied, they treated it with real delicate care. At times, they pretty much tamed them, at least in some degree. They decorated the heads of crocodiles with earrings and put bracelets on their feet and necklaces on them and stuff like that. There have been all kinds of mummies from the Egyptian world where they mummified crocodiles. So they were really weird about crocodiles and worshipped them and all that stuff. But the point is, they did do that with crocodiles. Verse 10, no one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. Who then is he that can stand before me? Who has given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. This is kind of harsh, it seems to me, but translation, Job, you can't even handle my creation. How do you think you can handle or understand the Creator? You're not capable of understanding this, Job. You need to trust. And all of those questions all through the book, scientists still can't answer most of those questions even today. He makes a reference to the Leviathan's teeth of terror in verses 12 through 14. I'll keep silence concerning his limbs of his mighty strength or his godly frame. Who can strip off his outer garment? Who would come near him with a bridle? Who can open the doors of the face? Around his teeth is terror. Now, is Leviathan a whale or something? Some have suggested that. Is Leviathan a whale? Okay. Well, his strong scales are his pride, shut up as with a tight seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. So Leviathan has scales, and they're very tight. They are joined to one another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. That doesn't describe a whale, right? Scales or shields, some translations call them shields, would be eliminated by that because the whale, we know, is a mammal. Besides that, we know that whales have been have really been tamed in a number of ways. Verse 18, his sneezes flash forth light. His eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils smoke comes forth as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. And so some scientists have said that there are a few dinosaurs like the Kronosaur that had an internal mechanism which was able to create some sort of a spark. They think it. They don't know, but they think that that's the case. Nevertheless, we know that that kind of thing isn't impossible. There's the glowworm. There is a firefly that chemically produces a light. We talked a little bit before about the bombardier beetle that sprays this chemical out of its body, and I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. But it's not a description of a whale or of a crocodile. Verse 21, he breathes his breath kindles coals, and a flame goes forth from his mouth. In his neck lodges strength, and dismay leaps before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together, firm on him and immovable. This doesn't sound like any animal that we're familiar with today. So what kind of animal was Leviathan? God says that he can breathe fire, at least if I interpret that correctly. In some cases, it's said that there may have been highly explosive gases which might have caught fire due to the sparks from snapping teeth and those kind of things. We don't know that for sure. I'll tell you what I believe. What I believe, do you remember hearing about fire-breathing dragons? See, in our culture today, we think dragons were a myth, but they weren't. They clearly were not. Dragons really did exist at one time. Dragons, I believe, are what we today call dinosaurs. And we'll get a little bit more into the wording of it and the translation of the word that is that way. I'll say a little bit more about it later. But I believe that Leviathan may very well have been a fire-breathing dragon. Just suppose for a minute that there really were fire-breathing dragons, and I think there were. This sounds like one. This sounds like one. Dragons had scales also. It is also the case that the stories of many dragons lived near water. Remember, Puff the magic dragon lived down by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist and all that. And so the history of that is that often dinosaurs lived in the water. Verse 24, his heart is as hard as a stone, even as hard as a lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty fear. Now remember those two things. His heart's hard, and when he raises up, the mighty fear. Because of the crashing, they are bewildered. The sword that reaches him cannot avail, nor the spear, nor the dart, or the javelin. Again, as strong as a crocodile is, it probably wouldn't apply to a crocodile. They say that although it's no guarantee, if you're ever in the water with a crocodile, one of the things you can do is poke them in the eyes. And we didn't read it, but that other thing, the guy was talking about putting mud in the eyes of a crocodile. He regards iron as straw, bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned into stubble for him. Clubs are regarded as stubble. He laughs at the rattling of a javelin. And so it doesn't sound like that is a crocodile. His underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreads out like a threshing sledge on the mire. And again, the underside of a crocodile is actually pretty soft. It's not hard as this is described. Verse 31, he makes the depths boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a jar of ointment. Does that sound like a crocodile to anybody? I don't think that sounds like a crocodile to anybody. Crocodiles don't make the ocean boil. Has anybody ever seen a crocodile make the ocean boil? I haven't. I don't know of anybody who has. Also, ointment is mentioned here. The ancient ointment was made out of sulfur, and one of the specific ingredients needed to create what would be basically a self-contained fire of some kind. Did that mean that he could heat up the water? It sounds like it. It sounds like he could heat up the water, probably with this fire that was created. There's no animal today that can do that. Now, there are stories of dragons all over the world, and I think that's significant. The beliefs about dragons differ. They're even more specific depending on the region that you're in. Dragons in the Western cultures since the Middle Ages are generally winged and horned. They're four-legged and they breathe fire. Dragons in the Eastern cultures are usually wingless. They're four-legged, but they're more like a serpent. And yet, historically, there's a number of different animals, and they're clearly different animals that in these historical documents they're described, and they're talking about dragons, and yet they're different animals. And so dragons, I believe, and we're going to say more about this, but dragons, I believe, and there's tons of them in the Bible, were what we would call dinosaurs. In other words, the word dragon, we're going to get into the Hebrew word for it here, if not today, next time. But the word for it that is translated dragon could apply and did apply to a number of different kinds of animals. And so look at the different types of dragons from drawings that people did through the years. And again, notice that sometimes they're being shown in water. And I believe that's because there were several different species or kinds of what we would call dinosaurs who were referred to historically as dragons. Remember, the word dinosaur didn't come along until the mid-1800s, okay? So remember, remember that they didn't come along until the 1800s. The physical description of Leviathan, it sounds like what is an ancient chronosaur, and so it seems like it could be, and these are dinosaurs, it could be a plesiosaur that is being described here. I believe, certainly, my personal belief is that Leviathan was absolutely what we would call a dinosaur. It's not impossible for there to be fire-breathing dragons. I don't know how many are aware that there are several animals today that do that kind of thing, like the bombardier beetle and those kinds of things. We discussed that earlier, but let me just say a couple of other things about the bombardier beetle. They shoot fire out of their rear end, and it's a defense mechanism. Now, this blast of gas that lights on fire when it leaves their body is at a temperature of 212 degrees. That's the boiling point of water. Hydroquinone and hydrogen peroxide are mixed together to cause this small explosion. Both of these chemicals, if they get together, they cause an explosion, and they're both in the body of this bombardier beetle. Now, this is an animal that's alive today. Both of these chemicals are in the body of this thing. But when it shoots out, they combine outside the body. They have different chambers inside this beetle's body to keep them separate. Because if they got mixed inside his body, it'd explode. So they don't mix until he's being chased by some other animal that wants him. And so he shoots out the back this stuff, and it explodes there. But you know what? Beetles don't understand chemistry. They're just surviving. And it is said that the well, I already said that. So God designed this beetle in a way. This is his defense mechanism. And no matter how the environment changed, this is the defense mechanism of the bombardier beetle. And so for someone to believe that this kind of, let me just reinforce something. For somebody to believe that this kind of complex mechanism and explosion, these two chemicals that explode when they get together, for somebody to believe that that happened by pure chance without a designer. In the first place, how did the one develop and then the other develop, and how did they develop at different times? Why did they develop? But for somebody to suggest that that happened by pure chance, by evolution, just stretches credibility, even for an evolutionist. And it's hard to stretch the credibility of an evolutionist. And if I suggest that this was done by a designer, I'm the one who's naive. I'm the one who doesn't know what I'm talking about. I'm the one who believes in fables. But I'm supposed to believe that that happened by pure chance without a designer. And so inside of a combustible engine of a car, nobody designed the spark plug or the mixture of the gas and the air in the piston. It all just happened, right? There was no designer of the combustible engine. It just happened. It evolved over a period of gazillions of years. It's ridiculous. Okay, the Leviathan is not mythical. If a little beetle can spray fire, why can't a big animal? From the description in the Bible, I think almost certainly Leviathan was a water animal, and it looks to me like it was probably a chronosaur. Just because we don't have this Leviathan animal today doesn't mean God didn't create it. Another dinosaur that was possible to emit fire, they say, was the hadrosaur. It was a land animal, and a lot of people say the hadrosaur looked similar to what some of the legends of dragons looked like. It's hard to know what specific body parts were for when all we have is fossilized remains. If you had never seen a skunk and didn't know what they did, but you found one fossilized, would you ever conclude that it smelled as awful as it does? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't, by finding a fossilized bones, you wouldn't say, this is a little animal. I bet it squirted out this really stinky smell. You wouldn't know it. There's no way to know. And so when we find fossils, there's no way to know and determine for sure that it did or didn't do something. We wouldn't know that a squid can expel ink or that a blowfish can expand the way that it does. And we would probably today pass the bombardier beetle off as some sort of myth of some kind, except those things are all alive today. And so it doesn't matter if there's no fire-breathing animal today. Many animals went extinct in the years following the flood, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more as well. We also have today electric eels. It sounds like that's impossible to exist. We have fish that glow in the dark. And so we have all these things. So just from Job 41, it looks to me like Leviathan is a dinosaur. The Chronosaur seems to fit the description best. And some of the eyewitness accounts in history throughout the world of dragons certainly seems to go along with that. And so again, God is reminding Job, look at my creation. Look at my creation. Cultures that didn't have animals that fit these descriptions, dragons or hadrosaurs, consider them to be a myth. But that doesn't make them so. I don't know how anybody can deny what God is describing with the behemoth in chapter 40, with Leviathan in chapter 41, that he's not describing dinosaurs. Now, Leviathan is mentioned a number of other times. We're not going to look at all of them, but we'll look at some of them. Leviathan was vulnerable to nothing. This was a huge animal. I think it would have been neat to see a fight sometime between Leviathan and Behemoth, but we don't have any information about that. And Job is talking. This is way early in the book of Job. And Job says, let those curse it who curse the day, who are prepared to rouse Leviathan. And so there Job makes a reference to it himself. In other words, Job is calling people foolish who do foolish things, such as walking up to Leviathan. God also speaks of Leviathan in a number of other places in the Bible. The psalmist Asaph says, you crushed the heads of the Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. God fears nothing. Everything's under his power, including the fiercest animals that have ever lived. Psalm 104, there is the sea, great and broad, in which are swarms without number. Animals, both small and great. There the ships move along, and Leviathan, which you have formed, to sport in it. They all wait for you to give them their food in due season. And so Leviathan was there when ships were there, according to God's word. Leviathan was there when ships were there. And I believe Leviathan was a dinosaur. And so that dinosaur was there when ships were there. Ships mean men made them. Okay? And so it's kind of like the psalmist is saying, these animals don't eat without your permission. That's a psalm about God's greatness, among other things. According to the Holman Concise Bible Commentary, Leviathan is invulnerable to human weapons. His eyes and nose flash with light, and fire pours out of his mouth. He is covered with armor and is Lord of all creatures. This is more like a terrible dragon than a crocodile. That's the Holman Concise Bible Commentary. Isaiah prophesied about the destruction of Leviathan. In that day, the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. Now, this one, it's possible that this maybe probable that his reference here to Leviathan is used here by Isaiah as a sort of a symbol for Satan, saying that he's going to be defeated. But whether that's the case or not, and I think it probably is, but whether that's the case or not, there's still a more direct, I believe, a more direct interpretation of Isaiah 27. So whatever the animal is, it's scary, it's fierce, you don't walk up to it, you don't mess with it, and it's not one that I can identify today. We know that, again, whales wouldn't qualify. I mentioned this before. Whales, they virtually tame whales. A killer whale can kill nearly anything, but they make pets out of them. And so they're generally gentle. It couldn't be that, because God says you don't even approach Leviathan. You're not even going to approach him and get near him. And so your kids are not going to see any of this in their books, but it's all true. One more thing about Leviathan. The Bible says he's a terrible, dangerous, intimidating thing, but that he's nothing for God. God can crush him. Back to Psalm 74 for just a minute. He says, you crushed the heads of Leviathan, and you gave him as food for the creatures of the wilderness. And then back to Isaiah's prophecy. In that day the Lord will punish Leviathan, fleeing serpent. And this is the one where it may be a reference to God defeating Satan, and it could be. But even if it's not that, I think that, and I emphasize if you take it literally, then what I think this means is it's a prediction that animals like Leviathan were going to go out of existence. In the time of Isaiah, what was that, 7th century BC, something like that. Isaiah was familiar with these things, and he says the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, and then even Leviathan, the twisted serpent. He will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. That very well could be a prediction of these animals going out of existence. Don't know that for sure, but I think that's very possible. Now, what about dragons in the Bible? There are thousands of legends of people seeing these things all over the place. Every civilization has stories of people having interaction with dragons, and often fighting dragons. We could spend weeks just talking about the famous people down through history who wrote down accounts of seeing dragons or seeing people killed by them. Aristotle, Pliny, Marco Polo, and the list goes on and on and on of well-known people who talked about things, encounters with dragons. Dr. Dan Biddle says that just from traditions in Europe, there are 81 different accounts of people and dragon confrontations. Some may be true, some may be exaggerated, we don't know. But these people were talking about real animals that they were there with. If dragons are just legends or myths and not real animals, why are there so many stories in every area of the world? Now that may require a paradigm shift for you, because your entire life you've been told that dragons were myths. And what I'm saying is they weren't. We're running out of time today, but there's a whole lot more to this, especially when we look at the Hebrew word for that, and we'll look at that again another time. And so it may surprise many people that the Bible uses the word dragon numerous times in both the Old and New Testaments. Now, we're all familiar with Revelation, where he calls Satan the great dragon. But man, we're out of time. That's really interesting, too, because they translate it dragon in Revelation when it applies to Satan, but they translate it something else in all other parts of the Bible. And it's pretty weird, but that's the way. So many people assume that the biblical dragon is an imaginary creature. And so, do you believe in dragons? Well, not if you just listen to the intelligentsia of our world, because they say they were all myths. I believe in dragons for a lot of reasons. One is the Bible talks about them a whole bunch of times. And it's because we don't have animals running around today and we call them dragons. But they're there. We're out of time. I've still got a whole bunch to cover. Unfortunately, many months ago, I scheduled, before I knew I was going to be doing this, I scheduled to be out of town a couple weeks ago, and I scheduled to be out of town next week. So I'm not going to be here next week, but I'm going to be back, and when I get back, I'll finish up dinosaurs. But there are lots of dinosaurs in the Bible, and so we'll look at those next time. Sorry, we're out of time. Hope everybody comes back tonight.